All right, it's a scorching hot day here in Lucea, Jamaica, and it's about 12 midday. My shadow is just beneath my feet. I can barely see it. It's very short, and it's very, very hot. I'm in my backyard garden. You guys have seen it before. Just reaped some guavas from this tree. If you follow my Instagram, you'll probably see that, and there's more to come. But I have an experiment that I want to run today. And the experiment is this. I want to see what triggers you, the viewer, more than anything about me standing in the hot sun in the middle of the day, no clouds in the sky, the sun is beating right down on me. I want you to choose from two options. And the two options are this, and you're going to comment below. A, are you concerned that I'm going to get dehydrated because I'm going to lose too much fluids, I'm going to get sunstroke or something like that? Or is it B, you're concerned that I don't have on any sunscreen, so I'm increasing my risk of sunburn or skin cancer? I'm very curious to see how you guys are going to comment. So while you're watching this, just jump in the comments right now and type either A or B. And we're going to see how the answers play out. But answer is coming up right now.
Welcome to the Healthy Reasonings podcast with Dr. Andre. You are now listening to your number one source for clear, unfiltered conversations about your health and wellness. Join us every Tuesday for success stories, educational topics, and interviews with wellness experts from around the world. You can listen to this podcast on your computer, phone, or any other electronic device that streams podcasts. Or download each episode and listen to it on the go. Let's get started with today's episode.
All right, so the things we do in the name of science. I mean, regardless of the answer that you gave, A or B, I'm sure you'll be delighted to see that I'm sitting in the shade now and far from the penetrating rays of the sun. And I'm drinking a glass of water, but that's exactly the point, isn't it? Because today we're talking about vitamin D. And vitamin D is something that I've been very, very interested in as of 2 weeks ago, when I, for no apparent reason, decided to check my levels of vitamin D and found that they were surprisingly low. And so you ask yourself, how is this possible? And more importantly, if it is possible in me, then how many other people is it possible in? And so today we have to have an honest talk about vitamin D, what it is and what it isn't. And before we do that, I want to invite all of you who want to hear even more unfiltered discussions like these and about this topic to visit healthyreasonings.com, www.healthyreasonings.com, where I'll go into a little bit more detail about what I'm talking about today. All right, so welcome back, everybody. I think for those of you who guessed that I'll get dehydrated, believe it or not, you were actually right. I did get pretty dehydrated. But guess what? Even though I'm wearing the same shirt, I only did this to try and ensure that there's continuity. But the truth is, since I started recording this episode, there's been so much that I've discovered that I'm just so excited to share with you that it took me a little while to complete this recording. Because the more I read and the more I research on vitamin D, is the more excited I've become. So today we're going to take a deep dive. As I mentioned in the little promo just before, there are some things that I won't be able to say on this platform, but I still want you to listen to the surface level of what we're going to talk about with vitamin D, because I believe we're going to be talking about this for quite some time to come. And for the first time that I can remember, I'm actually walking with some notes here because I want to represent well and ensure that everything I share is accurate and useful to you. So let's start talking a little bit about vitamin D. And of course, the background to vitamin D, as most people probably know, is that vitamin D was discovered officially somewhere in the early 1920s or 30s. It was first discussed in about 1650, though. The first case of vitamin D deficiency was described scientifically, called rickets. And rickets disease was primarily a bone problem that developed in small children growing up into adolescence. And it was thought to be due to a deficiency of a vitamin, because these children were prone to having deformed bones and easily broken bones. So in children, the disease is called rickets, and in adults, it's called osteomalacia, which literally means bad bones. And so in 1920 thereabout is when a scientist actually discovered that dogs that were raised 100% indoors and completely outside of the sun were found to get rickets disease. So these were dogs. And the scientists also figured out that if you fed them a little cod liver oil, that's the dogs, they would not get rickets. Incidentally, it was also discovered that the dogs could also be cured by exposing them to sunlight, which we now know to be the case, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And it was later discovered that the active compound in cod liver oil was none other than vitamin D3. So what they were discovering at this point was that there was something in cod liver oil and potentially in exposure to sunlight that was helping the dogs in this case to not develop these bony issues. Now, around that same time, they had just discovered vitamins A, B, and C. And so when they came across this vitamin, they just decided to name it vitamin D. And that's where we got this name of a vitamin D today. Now, classically speaking, a vitamin is a substance that the body is unable to produce on its own, and that it has to get from external sources in relatively small amounts, but then in the absence of these small amounts, it causes significant problems for the body because it's so vitally important for critical functions of the body. And this applies to all vitamins, but interestingly, not so much vitamin D, which really isn't a vitamin per se, but it actually is a steroid hormone. And we'll talk about that shortly when we talk about how we actually get access to this vitamin D. So many people, especially in Jamaicans will remember this image growing up. I certainly had to be exposed to it, and that's cod liver oil. I had to take it quite a bit, and looking back on it now, that was probably a good thing. And so we have been kind of exposed to the thought that vitamin D from food-based sources is the best way. However, vitamin D is actually obtained more reliably in another way. And before we talk about that, I just want to emphasize that vitamin D, being a hormone and not a vitamin, is actually critical for several reactions in the body. And in fact, almost all of our cells have receptors for vitamin D. And so rather than just being a vitamin that helps to facilitate a reaction, vitamin D is actually a signal. It's called a steroid hormone that alters the expression of certain genes. And these receptors for this messenger are found in almost all the cells of your body. So let's talk about how we actually get vitamin D. Well, the classical way is that when sunlight hits the skin, it converts one of the precursors for vitamin D3, which is an active form of vitamin D. It converts it and facilitates a reaction that then creates another substance that is further converted by the kidneys and the liver. And ultimately we get our vitamin D3 that does all the signaling that the body needs. Now the tricky thing is that all we ever speak about is the fact that it is sunlight that is needed. And that becomes a problem because the accurate thing to say is that it's not just sunlight, but it is one of the wavelengths of sunlight known as ultraviolet B radiation. Ultraviolet B radiation. Now, sunlight, as you could imagine, has lots of different wavelengths of light that are being emitted from the sun. But it is the ultraviolet B specifically that converts the inactive form of vitamin D to the early active forms, and ultimately when it gets converted by the kidney and the liver, it becomes useful to us. What that means, therefore, is to get adequate amounts of vitamin D3, we really need to get adequate exposure to UVB radiation, ultraviolet B radiation, and that opens up a whole new discussion, because how do we get ultraviolet B radiation? Well, first of all, the first thing to note is that it's easier to get ultraviolet B radiation closer to the equator in tropical countries, because the sun penetrates a lot better at that latitude, and as a result of that, ultraviolet B radiation is in abundance in the tropics. Now, interestingly enough, though, even within that statement, we would want to be talking about a sunny day to get adequate amounts of UVB radiation. And also, the best time to actually get this exposure is somewhere between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So you'll notice I was standing in the sun at 12 midday, which is halfway between the two. And that's probably the best time to get adequate UVB radiation. Another tricky thing about getting the right radiation for conversion of your vitamin D is that most of our windows block UVB radiation. So if you, like, I'll show you an image of my office here, and even though my office is bathed in sunlight, the glass windows and the frosting on the windows specifically are blocking the UVB light. Another challenge with vitamin D and sunlight and us getting adequate exposure is that we have been told that sunlight is dangerous for us and we need to be adequately covered when we go out in the sun. And we have been told repeatedly that we need to have sunscreen when we're going out in the sun. And that's tricky because, yes, sunscreen is ideally supposed to block UV radiation, and everybody has debates about which sunscreen is adequate for blocking. But if you're going to block UV radiation, then you're blocking the ability of the body to convert vitamin D. And people will argue that, hey, UVA radiation is dangerous because it can cause different problems with the skin, including skin cancer. And the irony with that is that vitamin D is actually found repeatedly to be preventative for cancer. So yes, UVA radiation, which is what we're trying to block by using the sunscreen, UVA radiation can cause several types of skin cancer, what are known as non-melanoma skin cancers. But UVB radiation helps to produce vitamin D3 ultimately, which is helpful in preventing melanoma as well as several other types of cancer. So it becomes a toss-up because you're preventing one on the one hand, which non-melanoma cancers tend not to be as difficult to manage. But on the other hand, you're exposing yourself to so many other problems. The other challenge with this sunlight issue is, as you could imagine, lots of us no longer go out in the sun for various reasons. So people who work night shifts might not get adequate sun exposure because after working a night shift, you go home to sleep and you sleep while the sun is out. There are different factors that influence how much absorption of the UV or exposure to the UV radiation you actually need to convert adequate amounts of vitamin D. And interestingly, ethnicity plays a significant role. So that makes an interesting conversation happen because, as I cheekily mentioned earlier, as Black people living in tropical countries generally, we actually avoid going out into the sun at the time when we really should be benefiting the most from UVB radiation, which is somewhere between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Certainly in Jamaica, We try to avoid being in the sun anywhere around that time unless we're at the beach. And even then, most of us stay in the shade. Interestingly enough, Caucasian people tend to require about 15 to 20 minutes of exposure on a sunny day during the summer months to get adequate vitamin D per day. But as Black people, people of African ancestry, because we have more melanin, we actually need greater exposure, more prolonged exposure to this UVB radiation to get the same amount of vitamin D conversion. So ironically, we should be getting more exposure even whilst we're in the tropics, but we don't. And of course, as people who are originally from the tropics, when we move to more northern latitudes, to countries in the north, we tend to suffer more for the same reason, because there's less exposure to the UVB radiation available in the higher up you go north. And of course, we're not getting adequate exposure as a result. And we're already a little bit at a disadvantage because we need more exposure to convert the same amount. Hope I'm not overwhelming you. So the facts here, we spoke about fact number 1, that vitamin D3 is not a vitamin. Fact number 2, we spoke about how we get the vitamin D3 converted. And fact number 3, people generally make a lot more vitamin D3 with their skin in the summer sunny months than in the dark winter months. And although we can get D3 from the diet, most people used to get the majority of their D3 from sun exposure. Here are a few other tricky facts now. Fact number 4, vitamin D3 deficiency is not just associated with bone problems. It's also associated with a huge number of diseases and disorders. And this is why I am so excited. I want you to stick around to ensure that you listen to the story section of today's segment, because it's going to be amazing. So the diseases that vitamin D3 deficiency has been documented to be associated with are anxiety and depression, asthma, arthritis. Of course, we spoke about rickets and bony diseases, but also inflammatory bowel disease. There's also a speculation that it may be associated with autism. There's hypertension. The list goes on and on. And it's just amazing to see how vitamin D has been documented so clearly throughout the medical literature to be associated with these problems, but yet most people are totally unaware of it. And I feel like now that I've opened up this Pandora's box, certainly for me, it's going to be a whole world of exploration. Another fact here that I wanted to point out is that many people who are obese, depressed, or suffering from anxiety, arthritis, autoimmune disorders in particular, are found to be overwhelmingly deficient in vitamin D3. And when I come to my story time in a little bit, we're going to see something very exciting. And then the last thing is a concern, which is that since the early 1980s, when we started to make public health recommendations about limiting sun exposure, we noticed a few things. And you can tell me if you've noticed this as well. Is that the rates of certain diseases started to skyrocket around the same time. I'm always careful about what I say on these platforms, so I want to remind you that for further discussion, jump into our community at healthyreasonings.com, sign up and listen to my unfiltered, even more unfiltered thoughts over there. You can ask me questions directly. For now, all I'll say is that there has been a noticeable trend since the 1980s when we started talking about the sun exposure being dangerous. There's been a trend that has seen obesity increase in both adults and children, as well as the prevalence of certain diseases like asthma and autism going way up. One of the things I was discussing recently with one of my friends is, certainly when I was in primary school, or people outside of Jamaica, elementary school, I can only remember one or two children in my class, in my cohort, that were overweight or obese. Every day we had to go out in the sun to play. I mean, we didn't have to, but we chose to. And that was what you looked forward to, the highlight of every day. We had physical education outdoors all the time. So you had quite a bit of sun exposure. For those of us in Jamaica, we play shirts versus skin. So one side always had to remove the shirt. And so you definitely were getting adequate sun exposure that time. And I don't really, I don't really remember having many obese children. And the reason is there was always that one child in the class who had the nickname Fatter or Bigger or Biggs. You never really had a problem with that nickname. It was unkind, but you never had a problem because it was really just one child who had that name, not two. So you didn't have to have a fatter one or a fatter two, bigger one, bigger two. I'm not being unkind, I'm just being practical. Now, as we're well aware, quite a few of our children nowadays are struggling with obesity. It's a well-documented issue, both locally in Jamaica and across North America. So something changed. And I mean, it's difficult to just ignore how many different things have emerged in that time. So this is probably not the best episode to get into the details of what I've been discovering in terms of using vitamin D as support for certain diseases. But I can promise you this, that the story time that's coming up is going to be extremely exciting for all of you. And if you jump into the Healthy Reasonings community with me, there's even more stories to come. In fact, stories in evolution. So the question is then, before we jump into our stories, what are we going to do about the problem that we have with vitamin D deficiency? Well, there's an estimate that maybe 50% of people across the world are deficient in vitamin D. And what I should probably do at this point is to just quickly highlight that vitamin D, in terms of blood tests, is measured in units known as nanograms per milliliter. And the thinking is that normal, depending on the lab that you go to, is between 30 and 50. Remember these figures carefully, between 30 and 50. And less than 30 is thought to be less than adequate vitamin D, and less than 20 is thought to be deficiency. Problem is, though, that according to this book I'm reading, an ideal vitamin D intake all year round can only be achieved in the tropics, outer tropics, and in Mediterranean countries, provided the entire body is exposed to at least a brief amount of sun at midday on every sunny day. On the other hand, it is impossible to form vitamin D for 5 to 6 months during the winter in England and Scotland or in Canada due to the sun's low position. So natives in equatorial countries usually achieve vitamin D levels of between 30 and 90, which is deemed to be natural. But even in the event of excessive sun exposure, there is no risk of vitamin D levels becoming too high. Overdosing is not possible using natural methods. And we're not going to talk about overdosing on this platform. We'll talk about it in our community. So no vitamin D can be built up in northern countries during the winter months from October to March. And we know that there is this condition, seasonal affective disorder, SAD, where it is found that during the winter months, people tend to have a lot more sluggish behavior, and there's a tendency more towards depression and anxiety. And that would make sense because there's inadequate access to UVB radiation during these months, and accordingly, there's less vitamin D being converted by these people. So let's quickly touch on a few things. One is tanning beds. And some people will go to tanning beds to get that nice tan. The thinking, though, is that most of these tanning beds tend not to produce UVB as much as they do UVA. So you question whether or not you're you're doing yourself a favor there in terms of vitamin D. The second thing is that most people who go running or walking or exercising tend to say that they get adequate sun because they go early in the morning before the sun is hot. This is true because you're getting sunlight, but you're not getting adequate amounts of UVB. So I'm trying my best to condense, with the excitement that I have, all of the information that I'm gleaning over time. It's probably not flowing as well as it should, but it will eventually. And I'm giving you a sneak preview into my initial thoughts and my initial excitement around vitamin D and where it's potentially lacking in the majority of us. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to talk about some exciting stories. Healthy Reasoners, there's so much more I'd love to be able to say during these podcast episodes, but out of respect for the platforms that I'm on, such as this one, I do not think it would be the best move. And so I want to be able to provide even more unfiltered, clear conversations for you, the Healthy Reasoners. So I invite you to join me in our very own private community over at healthyreasonings.com. There, we can talk in a little bit more detail. I actually have several benefits available for you. It's live Q&A sessions once a week. We're going to have discussions amongst ourselves. We're going to see if we can get some of our guests to come on there as well to share their thoughts in a more candid way, and so many other benefits, including behind the scene footage, other resources, merch and apparel, lots of things that are going to make your life so much better, healthier and more productive. So I invite you to join us over there at healthyreasonings.com. Sign up to join the community. It is totally free, and you're going to see me there live and in living color, speaking in clear, unfiltered terms. Jump over right now, and I'll see you there. A few years ago, I was facing a minor health challenge, and for some reason, which I really can't remember right now, I decided to check my vitamin D levels. Remember, we said normal is 30 to 50. Patients, natives of equatorial countries, of which I fit the bill, can be anywhere between 30 and 90. Well, mine was in the 20s at that time. And as I recall, I briefly started doing some supplementation. I did not increase my sunlight exposure, but I did some supplementation initially, which I thought would have been adequate, but I really didn't follow through on it because I was distracted by so many other things that I wanted to do to optimize my health. Fast forward to this summer, when I just wasn't feeling like myself, and again decided to check my levels, and as you'll see shown on the screen, the level came back at 20 something, which is a bit alarming to me because of course, at that time, I didn't recognize how critical UVB radiation was, and I thought I was getting enough sunlight in my office. So, I mean, separate and apart from the fact that there are different genetic explanations for how people convert vitamin D, this time it kind of hit a nerve, and I said, okay, there's something weird here. So I decided to, first of all, embark on the research that I'm describing here, which is still ongoing. But then I also decided, you know what? Let's say I'm actually getting adequate exposure to vitamin D or to UVB and should be making enough vitamin D. Could there be another reason why my levels came back low in the bloodstream? And as I began to read through the medical literature, I realized that yes, there's lots of different factors known as genetic polymorphisms, or different ways that your genes are inherited that can affect how readily you convert and utilize vitamin D. Which means that even if I do all the right things, my body might not be using it or absorbing it as well as it ought to. And so it means therefore that some people need more than normal supplementation to get the same vitamin D levels.
And there's a phenomenon which almost resembles insulin resistance. So it behaves like vitamin D resistance, where you could get exposed to adequate ways to make vitamin D, but still not make enough. So then it means that I should check my family. And this is exactly what I did. I hauled my mom and my dad and even my wife off to the lab, and we tested. And what do you know? Only one of us came back between 30 and 50. Everybody else was in the 20s. So that's 3 people so far, just in my little circle. So I decided, okay, let's just start testing a few patients. So I had a young lady who came to visit me. At age 24, 25, she complained of having really bad knee pain. And when the MRI was done, she was found to have severe osteoarthritis of both knees at age 24, 25, which really puzzled me, because that's really not supposed to be possible at such a young age, regardless of how aggressively you pound the knees into the pavement, for example, if she's an athlete or something. So that kind of was a red flag for me. And I was around the same time when I was looking into vitamin D. So I said, you know what? Why not? Let's check her levels. And this young lady's vitamin D level came back at 13, 1-3, which is not far from 0, which means that technically speaking, she is at risk of osteomalacia because she's vitamin D deficient. And so, of course, my curiosity is piqued, because I'm saying, okay, I just decided to check a few people, and it can't be a coincidence that so many of them are low or low normal. So recently, I had a family, mother and 2 daughters. Daughters are probably 20 and 17, and mommy is like early 50s, I believe. I hope I'm getting that right. And I said, all right, you guys have some non-specific problems. I've been working with you for a little while, and we've seen some improvement, but hey, I've been looking at this vitamin D thing. Let's see if it might be applicable to you. Let's just run the test and see what happens. Mommy comes back at 22, and both daughters come back at 16, 1-6. So we have a challenge. I'm not even going to touch on supplementation because I don't want to go there here. I really want to encourage you to jump over into the Healthy Reasonings community, because there's a lot that we need to talk about, even though we're living in a tropical country, for those of you who are here in Jamaica. And even more so if you're not in Jamaica and you live in a temperate climate in one of our northern latitudes or even southern latitudes, which can also be tricky, because you may very well be low in vitamin D, and the implications are numerous. Remember, we said that vitamin D is critical as a messenger to send signals to almost every cell of your body. It's critically important for the good health of the immune system as well, not just the bones. And that has so many implications for your health in general. And I think we're just barely scratching the surface in today's discussion. I'm probably going to have to do a part 2 or maybe even a part 3 to try and talk about other factors that need to be considered. But for now, I want to encourage you to at least consider having your vitamin D levels tested. Classically, the lab will do something called a 25-DOH test, which is known as a hydroxycholecalciferol test, I believe. Something like that. But it's something that I'm very passionate about. I am currently working on supplementation for myself and the people described, to see what the implications are for that. I'm pretty excited about it. There's one more person who came to see me who has struggled with autoimmune disease, very, very severe autoimmune disease for maybe the past 20 years, maybe more, and never really got any traction. in terms of getting improvement despite trying all the different options available. And of course, she had been wise enough to start taking a little bit of vitamin D, but nowhere near enough. And when I saw her, we did some work together, and I started her on some vitamin D with tremendous results. So all these stories are going to be coming through shortly, probably not on this platform. So I want to encourage you, I can't say it enough, jump over to healthyreasonings.com and let's talk some more on this. But vitamin D, critically important. I suspect that we're on the cusp of something major here. So this recording is probably going to be a landmark one. Please feel free to drop some stuff in the comments nonetheless. I'll try my best to answer them discreetly. Have you ever been tested for vitamin D? Do you get enough sunshine in the day? And certainly, is it between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.? Drop some comments below. Let me know what you're thinking. Also, I love to hear where you guys are located. It's very important to me because, of course, that's going to influence how much adequate UVB radiation you get. Another question that I could ask is, do you wear sunscreen? And if so, how much do you think that's affecting anyway, let's leave that alone. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Jump over to Healthy Reasonings community at healthyreasonings.com. Join, sign up, become part of the community. Let's talk some more. I'm going to be doing some Zoom Q&A sessions there quite frequently. So you'll have the opportunity to ask me questions directly. And there's so much more coming on that side. So I look forward to seeing you. Bless you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. Remember to subscribe to this podcast so you can be updated as soon as new episodes are ready. If you have a question, send us a voice note on WhatsApp or a WhatsApp message. The WhatsApp number is 1-876-405-7831. For more information or to become a sponsor, please email wellnessdocjamaica@gmail.com. See you soon.